It began with a blinding flash that lit up the night sky over northern Ukraine. Reactor No. 4 at the Chernobyl Nuclear Power Plant had exploded, ripping apart the concrete shell meant to contain it. Flames shot high into the darkness as radioactive smoke billowed into the air. Firefighters rushed to the scene, unaware they were charging straight into death itself. Just miles away, in the peaceful city of Pripyat, families slept soundly, oblivious to the invisible menace creeping toward them. But here's the question: what single decision could have prevented this catastrophe? By the end of this story, you'll know the answer. But first, we must understand how this nightmare began. Chernobyl was seen as a triumph of Soviet engineering, a reactor that symbolized progress in an era of Cold War rivalry. Nuclear power wasn't just energy, it was a statement of technological superiority. Yet this drive for prestige had its costs. The RBMK-1000 reactor, hailed as an engineering marvel, was riddled with flaws. Unlike Western reactors, it lacked a containment structure to trap radiation during an accident. Its graphite-tipped control rods, meant to stabilize the reactor, instead caused dangerous surges in power under specific conditions. Why was this reactor chosen? It was cheaper and faster to build, fitting the Soviet Union's need to expand its industrial capacity rapidly. However, these cost-cutting measures left it vulnerable to catastrophic failure, a fact that was known but kept hidden under layers of secrecy. On April 26, 1986, during a routine safety test, plant operators followed poorly understood instructions, disabled critical safety systems, and pushed the unstable reactor to its limits. At 1:23 a.m., a massive surge triggered 2 explosions, ripping apart the reactor and releasing radiation equivalent to 400 times the Hiroshima bomb. Imagine the terror of those first moments. Workers saw flames and debris scattered everywhere, but they had no idea of the magnitude of the catastrophe. Their initial confusion reflected a deeper cultural ethos, the Soviet ideal of stoikost, or resilience, which often translated into unquestioning obedience. This culture, combined with an urgent need to project Soviet strength, paved the way for disaster. As firefighters battled the blaze, they encountered something horrifying. Many described tasting metal in the air, an early sign of radiation poisoning. Around the reactor, a strange blue glow illuminated the night, a phenomenon called Cherenkov radiation, caused by ionized air. Lieutenant Vladimir Pravik, one of the first responders, was among the many firefighters who bravely charged into the inferno. Tragically, he, like dozens of his colleagues, succumbed to acute radiation sickness within weeks. In Pripyat, life carried on as normal for 36 critical hours. Radiation levels in the city soared to 1,000 times normal levels, but residents weren't told. Schools opened, children played outside, and workers commuted to their jobs, breathing in radioactive iodine-131, a deadly isotope that targets the thyroid gland. Why the delay? Officials feared the political embarrassment of admitting failure, a hallmark of Soviet secrecy. When evacuation orders finally came, buses filled the streets. Families were told to pack only essentials and leave, assured they'd return in a few days. They never did. Many residents described the heartbreak of leaving their homes behind, unsure if they would ever return. Sweden sounded the international alarm after detecting radioactive particles in the air over 1,000 kilometers away. Their scientists pieced together that the source had to be in the Soviet Union. Pressuring them to admit the disaster and shattering the illusion of control Moscow sought to maintain. The first casualties of the Chernobyl disaster were plant workers and firefighters like Pravik, whose heroism came at an unimaginable cost. Many, like firefighter Vasily Ignatenko, succumbed to acute radiation sickness, ARS, enduring excruciating symptoms such as burns and organ failure. Ignatenko's wife Lyudmila became a symbol of the tragedy, recounting his painful decline and ultimate burial in a lead-lined coffin to contain his radioactive remains. The human toll didn't end with those initial deaths. The World Health Organization estimates 4,000 deaths from radiation-related illnesses, though Greenpeace suggests the toll could be as high as 90,000. Children were especially vulnerable, suffering from thyroid cancer caused by contaminated milk and food supplies. For the 350,000 people displaced, the trauma of leaving everything behind was profound. Evacuees like Valentina Shevchenko spoke of the pain of losing their homes and the stigma of being labeled Chernobyl victims. Many suffered from anxiety, depression, and PTSD, struggling to rebuild their lives in unfamiliar places. The disaster also led to advancements in understanding radiation sickness, with lessons applied in subsequent nuclear accidents like Fukushima. The Red Forest, located near the reactor, became one of the most visibly affected areas after the disaster. Radioactive fallout swept through the area, turning the once thriving pine trees a sickly orange before they died, earning the forest its haunting name. Today, it remains one of the most radioactive places on Earth, with contamination deeply embedded in the soil. Radioactive isotopes like cesium-137 and strontium-90 spread across rivers and farmland, rendering much of the region unsafe for decades. Winds carried these particles across Europe, contaminating food supplies and water far beyond Ukraine and Belarus. Yet in the absence of human interference, wildlife has flourished in the exclusion zone. Wolves, lynxes, wild boars, and even rare Przewalski's horses roam freely, creating an unintended refuge. However, studies reveal genetic mutations among plants and animals, such as albinism in birds and reduced fertility in some species. The exclusion zone has become a unique laboratory for studying radiation's effects, offering insights into ecological recovery, but also stark warnings about nuclear devastation. The Chernobyl disaster exposed deep flaws in the Soviet Union's governance, marked by secrecy, censorship, and a rigid hierarchy. Plant operators were not informed of the reactor's dangerous design flaws, and even after the explosion, officials delayed evacuation, downplayed the severity, and withheld critical information. This pattern of denial was emblematic of a system that prioritized appearances over safety. For many Soviet citizens, the disaster became a symbol of the regime's failure. Nationalist movements in Ukraine and other Soviet states gained momentum, fueled by anger over Moscow's mishandling of the crisis. International scrutiny forced Mikhail Gorbachev to confront the disaster publicly, accelerating his policy of glasnost, openness. Gorbachev later admitted that Chernobyl was a significant factor in the Soviet Union's eventual collapse, as it shattered public trust and exposed systemic weaknesses. Chernobyl sparked a global reckoning in nuclear safety. In the United States, where containment domes and redundant safety systems were already standard, the disaster prompted further reassessment. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission, NRC, enhanced real-time monitoring systems and evacuation protocols, ensuring quicker responses to potential disasters. Globally, the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, introduced new safety guidelines, and the Convention on Nuclear Safety was adopted in 1994 to ensure greater international cooperation. Operators worldwide embraced simulator-based training to minimize human error, and a safety-first culture replaced the prioritization of productivity. Public attitudes toward nuclear power shifted dramatically. Anti-nuclear movements gained momentum in Western Europe, with nations like Germany committing to phase out nuclear energy. The US saw declining enthusiasm for building new reactors, while countries like France doubled down on nuclear energy with enhanced safety protocols. The lessons of Chernobyl resonate today, particularly in responses to disasters like Fukushima, where global cooperation and improved technology mitigated even greater harm. Today, Chernobyl stands as both a warning and a symbol. The new safe confinement, completed in 2016 at a cost of $2.3 billion, encases Reactor No. 4, but the site remains radioactive. Tours of the abandoned city of Pripyat draw thousands of visitors. Yet for those who lived through the disaster, it's a scar that never fully heals. And now, the answer to our opening question. What single decision could have prevented this catastrophe? Transparency. If Soviet officials had acknowledged the flaws in the RBMK reactor and prioritized safety, the disaster might never have happened. Chernobyl reminds us that when ambition outpaces caution, the cost is often unimaginable. It's a legacy etched in history, a tragic reminder of the human and environmental price of neglect.